Good evening. Hope everybody can hear me. My name is Michael Spaeth, and I am a principal planner with the town of Earl Valley and the town's project manager reviewing the applicant's proposals. I will be facilitating tonight's meeting. Thank you for joining us for this neighborhood meeting regarding the proposed general plan amendment and rezoning for the Vistoso Golf Course. Next slide, please. Clearly, the mechanics of tonight's meeting are going to be a bit different than our regular in-person meetings. Our number one goal tonight is to have a fair, efficient, and productive meeting. You've heard a lot from the applicant regarding the proposal and from the town regarding the process. Tonight is the first opportunity for you to share your concerns and directly ask questions. We are going to do our best to get through as many questions and comments as we can tonight. Everyone's microphone, other than myself, will be muted throughout the meeting unless it is your turn to speak, to ensure as smooth and efficient meeting as possible. Only I can turn on your microphone at the appropriate time, and when it's your turn and you'd like to ask a question or provide comments. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, I will provide a quick how-to on raising your hand on your computer or telephone when you have a question. I'll get into that later in my presentation. Tonight's meeting is scheduled to go until 8 p.m. We may go longer with the group's permission if necessary. Finally, I'd like to note that this meeting and the PowerPoint presentation will be posted on this project's webpage tomorrow. Next slide, please. So where are we in the process? We've produced 2 informational videos that have been posted on this project's webpage on ovprojects.com. I hope all of you have seen those videos as they contain detailed information about the applicant's proposal and the process. This evening, we intend to build on the information provided in those videos with the aim to make this meeting more productive. Following this meeting, we will send invitations to future focus area Zoom meetings with homeowners in adjoining subdivisions. These focus area meetings will be conducted in June and July. Everyone may attend the meetings, but the meeting focus and time will be on the concerns and questions of those who live in a certain area. Starting in August and September, we are anticipating conducting in-person neighborhood meetings if it is safe to do so. If not, additional Zoom meetings will be offered. The general plan amendment and rezoning applications are scheduled for 2 meetings before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and those will take place in October and November. Lastly, Town Council will consider the requests at a public hearing in December. Per state law, Town Council must consider a general plan amendment in the same calendar year that it is submitted. So the hearing scheduled in December will satisfy the state mandated requirement. Next slide, please. Now that we've outlined the overall process, I'd like to take a minute to talk about the schedule for the focus area meetings. Again, the primary benefit of these meetings is to present an opportunity to discuss in much greater detail the issues affecting those specific groups of neighborhoods. We don't get to your question tonight because of the very high number of people participating. Please make sure you attend your subdivision's designated focus area meeting, as shown on the screen. We have set up 4 focus area meetings. The first meeting is scheduled for June 4th. The second meeting will be held on June 9th. The third meeting is scheduled for June 10th. And the last meeting is scheduled for June 11th. Yellow card notices will be sent out to all homeowners within each respective subdivision in advance of each meeting. So please be on the lookout for those. Details regarding the focus area meetings will also be going up on the yellow signs that are out on the property. For more information, you can go to ovprojects.com, where this schedule and additional information will continue to be posted. Next slide, please. Again, the purpose of this meeting is to build upon the first 2 videos that have been viewed over 1,400 times and generated over 1,100 questions and comments. And most importantly, provide you an opportunity to share your comments and have your questions answered directly. The agenda for tonight's meeting is first, the applicant's representative, Ms. Linda Morales, is going to provide a very brief overview of the project. Second, it will be your turn. At this point, I'd like to also provide some information on what we have done with the questions and comments received to date and the plan moving forward. First, those questions and comments were used as the foundation for the second informational video that was posted on April 30th. Again, if you haven't seen the video, please do so. Secondly, those questions and comments are being used as the basis of this meeting to help inform the conversation. From all the questions and comments we received, staff anticipates there are at least 3 core topics that we will bring forward tonight. The first is, can the property be purchased as a town park, and what impacts will there be on open space and wildlife? The second is, what impacts will there be on area traffic? And the third is, what are the impacts to property values? Of course, there are other key topics to be discussed as well, but we know these 3 will certainly be a frequent topic discussed this evening. Your questions and comments tonight are certainly not limited to this, but again, we anticipate these will be core messages and discussion topics this evening. We have asked the applicant to be prepared to address questions that we hear tonight and have also invited key town staff members to answer questions as we get them. Lastly, the focus area meetings will be another venue where your comments and questions can be addressed in much greater detail. Third on our agenda this evening, I'd like to provide more information about next steps, and then finally I'll conclude by reiterating upcoming opportunities for public participation. With that said, let's get started. I'd like to turn it over to the applicant, Ms. Linda Morales, for her presentation.
Okay. All
Go ahead,
right.
Ms. Morales, I think we got it.
All right, we're here now. Sorry, I've been sitting here in my room talking to myself. My apologies. Thank you so much for having us and getting that up on the screen, Michael. So I am Linda Morales. I'm with the Planning Center. I am the consultant on the project. And with me tonight is Peter Oelbaum, who is with Romsman. He is here as well to answer any questions, as well as one of the other members of the consultant team, Mr. Pat Lopez. So throughout the course of the night, I will answer some of the questions, and I'll kick it off to some of them as we see who is the best one to answer each of the questions. Because we've already done 2 informational videos, I don't want to go into too much detail about the land use proposal, but again, it's a general plan amendment and a PAD amendment that would allow us to develop select portions of the former golf course in exchange for the dedication to a public or third-party entity of 115 acres of open space. And that is to completely, but also include the golf cart path. The green areas that you see on each of the 2 plans would be that 115 acres. Plus there's actually some other washes in between some of the development areas as well that would be open space as well. And then there, if you see the pink line that kind of runs through the open space area, that's the approximate location of the golf cart path that could become a public trail that would be a continuous loop through the community, and again be a community asset. We have some development areas. We have 2 alternatives that we're looking at: an assisted living in the former driving range area is one option, and then the second option on the right is a single family option. We do have some independent living that would go with the assisted living perhaps in the concept 1. Concept 2 would be again single family residential. There is already high density residential zoning in the area of the clubhouse. We're asking for an expansion of that to allow perhaps a casita type of development that would be a little higher density, but about half the density that is actually allowed currently in the high density residential. We have some fourplexes that come around where the golf villas are. We have single family residential up next to Stonegate, between that and the Richmond project under development now. We have a few larger custom lots up in this area along Stonegate. And then down toward the school, we have some other single family residential. But again, all of this, if we are to be successful with this project, would all result in, again, 115 acres of permanent open space protected for the public. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Mr. Spade.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. Before we get started with your questions, I'd like to cover a few things. First, this is certainly a unique situation. It is not unusual for the town to receive a general plan amendment and rezoning application where an owner wants to change the use of their property. The resulting neighborhood meetings typically focus on determining if the change fits the neighborhood and the needs of the general community. While that is certainly the case here, the deteriorating condition of the golf course and its uncertain future is a unique and major factor. This impacts to the property values of the neighbors and property owner and is a mutual problem that clearly needs to be addressed and solved. Most understand everyone has an interest in solving that problem and making sure there is open space and trails moving forward. We hope all will work collaboratively to find out what that solution is. We as staff understand that the current plan is a first draft and not the ultimate solution. In fact, we think there are more sensitive and compelling designs. Throughout the neighborhood meetings, we wish to respectfully push all participants, the property owner, residents, the homeowners associations, and others, to work toward a collaborative solution. We understand that there is a lot of anxiety, confusion, and anger out there, but we hope folks can come around and pivot toward creating a win-win solution that is acceptable to many of you. I think most of you realize that the issues impacting residents in this area are not going to go away anytime soon. In my planning career, many, not all, controversial projects start out with many participants, including the applicant and neighbors, simply seeking a win, generally at the expense or loss of the other. Throughout a typical neighborhood meeting and application process, extreme positions tend to get recognized for what they are, extreme. Also, I have observed that some denied applications for complex and controversial projects tend to get resubmitted after the first action and even the second or third action until a successful compromise is reached and or the political winds change. Whether it's now or in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, a solution is needed and should be in everyone's best interest. Time will tell with this community issue and development application. So let's get to work. Next slide, please. During the question and comment period, if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your computer or telephone generated hand. Just to be clear, I don't mean literally raise your hand in the air. This is a specific or computer or virtual feature in Zoom. There are 2 ways to do this. For those participating on any platform other than by a phone, which is a screenshot on the screen, find the participants icon. This is located either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device. Click on participants, and this will open a dialog box that lists all participants in the meeting. You can click on the raise your hand button at the bottom of that list, or you can click on your name and select raise your hand. For those participating via phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. Raised hands will be moved to the top of the list in the order in which they were raised. I will then announce your name and turn your mute off so you can speak. Please make sure you are not also muted on your personal device. When I announce who is up to speak, I will also announce the next person whose turn it will be to speak so that that person will be prepared. Once you have asked your question or made a comment, I will remute you to allow the speaker to provide an answer. We have several hundred participants tonight. So if your question has already been asked, please simply say so, lower your hand, or say ditto. Again, we ask that everyone approach this meeting with an aim toward creating a win-win solution. Again, determining the future of this property is a community-wide issue that is not going to simply go away if these applications are unsuccessful. Please keep this in mind when commenting or asking your questions tonight. Theatrics and personal accusations do not move the needle toward a solution. Civil discourse is most welcome. We are going to do our best to get through as many questions and comments as possible. Again, we have over 300 participants on this meeting tonight, and we will do our very best to get to each of you. Please ask your comments or questions, keep your comments or questions to no longer than 3 minutes out of fairness to all participants who wish to be heard. My aim is to keep things moving along in a fair and efficient manner. With that, we can begin the question and answer period. So Ms. Sims, if you could put the gallery view back up. Or stop sharing, there you go. Yeah, so if everybody can click on gallery view if they'd like. I have a list of, let's see if I've got hands in the air. So we do have a few hands. It looks like Sue Parrott is up first, and then Tom Stegman. So Miss Parrott, I will unmute yourself. Like I said, please make sure that you are not muted on your personal device. Ms. Parrott, are you able to unmute yourself? We'll have to come back to you. I guess I can't seem to get you on. How about Tom Stegman? Have a question? Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. First of all, a comment that at this time, I don't think there is a win-win that is in the works. We have just a preliminary proposal out there, and our only comment is that the town needs to uphold the general plan that the residents voted in. My question is really directed towards Spectra Properties, and the question is, are you involved in the assisted living development that's being proposed for First and Tangerine at the same time?
Okay, I believe that was for the applicant. So Ms. Morales, let me get to you here and I'm gonna unmute you. And folks, in case it's not obvious, the mechanics of this are a little bit slow, so I appreciate everybody's patience and working with us here. So Ms. Morales, you are unmuted, I believe.
All right, and if you could go ahead and unmute Peter Oelbaum too, and he may want to jump in on this a little bit too. Spectra Properties is actually not on the call right now. They are not currently participating in this particular part of that. They're not moving forward given some of the uncertainty in the market. We are still moving forward because we've had interest from other parties that are very interested in the assisted living. And I know that the town's had many inquiries about assisted living in the Rancho Vistoso area. Peter, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, thank you, Linda. I think you said pretty much what needed to be said in the just days leading up to the submission of the application. Given the climate, the economic climate, and what was happening and the uncertainty, Spectra decided at this time not to proceed. Whether they come back in or not, I can't say. That would be for them, but I don't believe they are participating in this call to answer that question. But as you said, we have heard from others in the business who have expressed some interest in assisted living facility in that location. So I think for the moment, we are proceeding on a more generic, if you will, process.
And if I
Sorry, Linda, 1 second. I think I'll have to unmute you again. Go ahead, Linda. Ms.
Okay.
Moran.
And I just wanted to add that is the reason that we did have the second site plan in the application at this time with the single family residential option. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, our list is up next. We have, is Sue Parrott is still on here. Is she able to unmute herself? I don't want to not give her the opportunity to ask a question if I can't seem to get her to unmute herself. So it looks like,
Hi.
oh, there we go. Hi. Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm really sorry. That was an accident. I didn't mean to raise my hand. I'm listening. But thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, so we've got Jeff and Sharon Davis are up next, and then Tim Bowen, you are on deck. So Jeff and Sharon, if you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, first I'd like to just start with a comment. I know you're pushing for win-win, and that's great. And I know you want to have a solution so this doesn't go on in people's lives forever. And that's great. But you have to start in the beginning with trust. And there has not been trust formed with the Rompson Corporation and this property. A specific question I have is the 115 acres, is it part of Rompson's rezoning request, or is whoever they say they're going to give it to in perpetuity, does that organization then have to get it rezoned from golf course to open space?
Okay, yes, Ms. Morales, I'll send that one to you.
Yes, thank you for that question. The intent is absolutely to, as part of this process, here, I'll start my video, sorry.
Thank you.
There we go. Absolutely, the intent of this process is to do that all at once, not to put that off. We have been focusing on our application on only the areas to be developed. But if we're successful in doing that, part of that would be to downzone, if you will, the golf course to be open space.
All right, next up is Mr. Tim Bowen, and then after that, we've got Alfred Steckley. Sorry if I butchered that. Mr. Bowen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. My question is for the Planning Center, and my question regards the planned area development document itself, not the general plan amendment. And I'm referring to page 43 of section 4, which is PAD implementation, section D of that, David. And basically, this is a section that deals with density transfer and what's allowed per the PAD document that's released by the town. And I'll read briefly. Density transfer between and within neighborhoods shall be permitted, provided that the following conditions are met. Condition 1, the dwelling unit cap for each neighborhood is not exceeded. Condition 2, a planning unit to which density is transferred cannot increase more than one density category. For example, a low density LDR planning unit could not change to medium density, could change to medium density MDR, but not to medium high density MHDR. And the final condition, a planning unit may only change to the next higher density category one time. And thank you for listening to that preamble. It would appear that the PAD amendment proposes to increase density at the course driving range from resort golf course to HDR in option 1, in concept 1, and MDR in option 2. This results in bypassing density categories. For example, for the HDR, you're bypassing VLDR, LDR, MDR, and even MHDR. And in concept 2, you're bypassing VLDR and LDR. Question I have for the Planning Center is, per the PAD that's released to the town right now, is this type of PAD amendment even allowed internally per the PAD document?
Ms. Morales?
Yes.
Yes, so that is the reason for the PAD amendment that is part of this request. The density transfer provision would allow that without an amendment to that. So density transfers can happen administratively without having to go back to council, without the planning commission, without a staff review, well, with staff review process. But this kind of change that we're talking about would require the approval by planning commission and council.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morales. So Mr. Alfred Steckling is up next, and then Jane Baker.
Yes, it is Steckline.
Sorry.
No problem. And maybe this is a mute question since Spectre Property has withdrawn, but my question was in the option 1, what is west of the planned senior citizen facilities? What will that be? What appearance will it have? And will that never be developed going forward?
Yes, Ms. Morales.
Can we put the plan up real quick?
Ms. Sims, do you mind putting the concept plans up?
So in both of the options, as we're getting those pulled up, we do have open space, and the open space varies based on the two. The area that is depicted on the assisted living, again, because that is a more intense use, we are depicting a larger buffer. A good portion of that, according to with the Spectre development that this was based upon at the time, was this part of that. See the golf, the cart path that comes down through here. This part would be part of the green belt and part of the open space. And because that is a less intense use, we do have a smaller buffer, but we certainly would have the green belt coming along that as well as the cart path. And the cart path does go through there. It's a little hard to see because of the dark green that we show the buffers, but that is about between 100 and 200 feet of open space in there, and considerably larger on the assisted living. So it would be green belt in either situation. I apologize for my audio quality. My internet just all of a sudden stopped working very well. So hopefully we'll get through this. I know I'm a little hard to hear tonight, of course.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. So next up is Ms. Jane Baker, and then after her is Barbara Rosenthal. Ms. Baker, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, yes. I'm the president of the Centerpoint Vistoso Community Association. And I'm sure you know it's a 343 home community located smack in the middle of the former golf course. We have a large number of residents who would be negatively impacted by rezoning of the property. I guess my big question is for the town, what is the response to the overture by the state of Arizona's state parks and trails with funding opportunities available for the town to purchase and convert the land into a state park or trail?
Okay, great. Thank you for your question. I am going to unmute Miss Christy Diaz-Trahan, the town's. Oh. Okay. Actually, check that. I'm going to ask Mr. Vella the town's planning manager to answer that question if I can find him here. There you go. Mr. Vella.
Hi, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. So the answer to that question is, working with the State Department as far as potential land acquisitions entirely premature at this moment. We have a general plan and rezoning application in front of us that by law we must process. And pursuit of a grant and discussion of purchase of this property by the town, again, is a premature discussion at this juncture. The town is involved with a parks plan, as I think most of you are well known. The approach staff is taking in terms of any potential recommendation relative to purchase and grants is really to recognize that the town, the fiscal responsible path forward for the town is to seek a win-win so that open space is set aside and some of those costs are reserved for distribution and payment and work and really satisfying the needs of the entire park system. So right now, our approach and our entire focus is on this application, and we'll be continue to do so up through December and until council action. So that's where we are on that issue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vella. Next up is Barbara Rosenthal, and on deck is David Chanover. I hope I didn't butcher that one. Miss Rosenthal, please go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. It says I can't unmute myself, but I guess you've already unmuted me.
We can hear you. Yep.
Can hear you.
Thank you. I'm back on the golf course, and probably a lot due to the virus. I see hundreds and hundreds of people walking, riding their bikes, whatever, on the golf cart paths, which will no longer be attractive when there are homes on both sides of the golf course path. But I think even more important to me, as I looked at the plan that is submitted, the houses that are proposed to go in behind Bella Vista, the street that dumps out onto Desert Fairways, dumps right across from Innovation Academy. We have enough traffic in this neighborhood, and we certainly don't need more where the children are trying to cross the street. That's the end of my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Miss Morales, if you'd like to answer that.
I was just going to say that we have hired a traffic engineer, and part of their scope of work is to look at the safety aspects of that. So, and we are aware of the concerns that people have expressed over that, and that's a priority for us to look into it. So thank you.
And it looks like we have some more folks joining us, so I'll just repeat what I said from the outset. So I've got everybody on mute unless you want to ask a question or make a comment. And I'm also actually shutting off videos just so it's not overbearing. So if you think you're having an issue with your video, don't worry about it. It's coming from me here as the facilitator. So just as a heads up. So next comment is, or question is from David Chanover, and on deck is Dave Yunkin. So Mr. Chanover, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Firstly, I have two comments for the town. The first being that this process is inherently flawed because your neighborhood meetings are in August and September when a very, very large number of the residents are gone. Now, I realize that's part of your process, but if you must have meetings at that time, I would encourage you to also have them by Zoom or some other electronic means so that those of us who are not in the area can participate. Otherwise, you're stacking the deck in favor of Rumsman. Second, I didn't see the Cove on the list of neighborhood meetings. You have Center Point, but you don't have the Cove in Center Point. So now, as far as Rumsman is concerned, I am opposed to any development in this area, but I also recognize that what Mr. Spaeth said is true. At some point, I'm guessing Rumsman will keep coming back over and over again, perhaps with different town council, and eventually some sort of development will be approved here. If that is the case, and if you are inclined to approve development now, then I would ask for several things. First of all, that you maximize the open space for the benefit of the residents. I don't personally believe that 115 acres is sufficient. To that end, I also need to say that some of the buffer zones are not large enough. At least it doesn't appear that they are anywhere near large enough. And there are places where the trail area, I think what you called green belt, is way too narrow. There should be 300 or more feet to make it feel like desert instead of 100 to 200 feet, which means probably 100 feet. I also think that this property if in fact is going to be made into open space, must be conveyed out of Rompspin before, as a condition to the rezoning. In other words, you don't get to keep it and then when you come around to subdividing, change your subdivision application and leverage the homeowners. If it's going to be made into open space, it needs to get out of Rompspin immediately, which means essentially when you approve the amendment. Finally, I don't believe that this is a fair trade, because essentially all this land is zoned recreation right now. It is already for the benefit of the homeowners in the area. It is for the benefit. It is for them to use as a recreation, whether it's golf course or something else. To say that you are giving us land in exchange for the rezoning application being approved, to me is not fair consideration. If you know what consideration means on a legal level, you're not giving us anything we don't already have. So I think Rompspin needs to also be required to chip in a large amount of bucks to convert the land into desert area, because by itself it will take 10 or 15 years to convert to desert. So my feeling is that there has to be consideration paid by Rompspin to in the form of improvements to this area in order for any sort of application to be approved.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morales, did you want to respond to anything that was asked?
Sure. I'd like to respond to the first part, and then I'm going to kick it over to Pat Lopez for the second part. But the first part, as far as conveying the open space over, absolutely, we're in agreement. That would happen at the same time. So there, it wouldn't follow. It would be, whatever mechanism we get, we want to convey it right away. And if we can unmute Pat and let him.
Okay, get there. Let's see. There we are. Mr. Lopez, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Spaeth. I just wanted to respond to the comment about it being zoned for recreation. That is true, but it is private property that can be used for recreation. It is not public property. So anyone currently using it for recreation is trespassing. Rompspin hasn't done anything about that at this point, but at some point it does need to protect its rights. The other thing is, in terms of recreation uses, if this is approved, Rompspin is not a developer. They don't develop property, but they would look probably to sell this property to someone who would, as has been said earlier, either look in the future to rezone it or look to develop it consistent with its current zoning. And we haven't really looked into that, but examples might be a Topgolf operation, or a privately operated Frisbee park, or a privately operated exercise area. Who knows what's going to happen with enclosed gyms and whether or not exercise is going to move outdoors, or a private mountain bike park, something like that. But it is not a public area. So in terms of the public's ability to control this, I think someone else had suggested that as a condition to rezoning, the property would be dedicated for the agreed upon use. And yes, that's what the proposal is. So that it's clear, what's being offered here is in exchange for the rezoning of a relatively small portion of this, all the buffer areas, all the open areas would be conveyed, and whether that's conveyed to the town, whether that's conveyed to a homeowners association, whether that's conveyed to a nonprofit that's established, Rompspin is open to all those opportunities. So that is definitely part of the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lopez. Next up, we have Dave Yunkin. And again, I apologize if I'm butchering your name. And then on deck, we have Rob and Stacy Query. So Mr. Yunkin, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. It's Yonkin, but that's pretty close. Good try.
Sorry.
Well, I wanted to make the point that in the video, an Oro Valley staff member related that Rancho Vistoso has its own well-designed and engineered planned area development plan to make her point. To be fair then, shouldn't changing that plan, putting structures, streets, noise, and increased congestion where it was planned to be recreational, be it a golf course or other open space, shouldn't that be decided by the homeowners of Rancho Vistoso, who would be the most affected? Putting buildings behind our patios could never be a win for us. There's no buffer zone behind the casitas because there isn't room for any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so next up is Rob and Stacy Query, and on deck is Doug Anderson. So Mr. or Mrs. Query, you hopefully are unmuted. Can you just make sure that you are not, there you go. Yep, go right ahead.
Good evening. First, my comment would be for Mr. Spaeth and other town employees. You continue to refer to this proposal as a win-win. This is not a win-win as it's proposed, and I think it's a little irresponsible for the town to continue to state that. My questions, though, were really going to be for Mr. Oelbaum. In 2015, the Romspen annual report states on page 38, and I quote, in 2015, Romspen Club Holdings acquired a golf course in Tucson, Arizona. Romspen Club Holdings is operating and preparing the property for future sale and potential creation of development tracts of land within the property with the investment of additional funds. You've continued to state that you wanted to try and either sell it or run a successful golf course and you were unable to, but the moment you acquired this property from auction, you are indicating to your shareholders that you want to develop it for tracts of land. If you could address that. Secondly, you also indicated that you reached out to your stakeholders in 2017. Could you be perfectly clear who exactly those stakeholders were and when you reached out to them?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morales, did you want me to pass it off to Peter? Okay, so while I'm getting to unmuting Peter, I did want to just address and clarify when we as town staff use the phrase win-win, we certainly aren't implying, as I said in my intro, and maybe you didn't catch it, that the current plan proposed is not that ultimate solution. We recognize that that can be improved upon, and we're hoping that all parties can work towards a win-win that most people are comfortable with. So I can certainly understand your perspective, but just wanted to clarify that's what we meant by the phrase win-win. So give me just a second, I will get to Mr. Oelbaum's and we'll let him go. So Mr. Oelbaum, you should be unmuted now.
Yes, thank you. So this question was asked and I provided an answer that I think was published to the town website, and I don't have immediate access to it, but my recollection of exactly what happened and what I said is as follows, that what was reported in that annual report in 2015 was no different than what we have always claimed. Since we took control of the property in 2014, we poured and lost millions of dollars operating a golf course for over 4 years. In that annual report, we discuss potential needs for capital being reinvested in this property. And that included the operations, the loss, the improvements, and potentially identifying areas of land within the golf course that could be potentially rezoned or could be subject to a development. One of those areas, in fact, was early on identified as the 6-acre parcel that already had an HDR zoning on it that was essentially made up of the front parcel and the parking area in front of the clubhouse. So during that time, we were looking at all options. I would venture to say, and this was in the answer I provided previously, that 99% of the money we have put in to this property between 2014 and 2019 was for operation of the golf course, improvement of the golf course, and trying to sell the golf course to other parties. We had the property listed for sale for a couple of years with one of the top brokers in the country. We didn't get one credible offer, not a single one. When we closed the property, we continued to work with two different buyers. We accepted both of their offers to sell the property. Neither was able to close the transaction. So, you know, I think, as I said, I mean, annual reports, the verbiage of an annual report is often somewhat difficult to navigate, but there is no daylight between what was said in that annual report and, in fact, what actually happened. The second, I also add one more thing. I mean, to that point, we didn't even hire either Pat or Linda in the planning center until we closed the golf course. So we weren't spending any money on potential redevelopment. There was a quick study of the 6-acre parcel because when we were trying to sell the golf course for a couple of years, it was suggested to us that maybe if we removed the 6-acre parcel from the golf course sale, would make the golf course purchase cheaper and someone would come along and purchase the golf course, but not the 6-acre parcel. But again, that didn't generate anything like that. So that's really, I think, the answer to that question. In terms of who we reached out to at the time, I think the best way to put this is, and we addressed this at the time of the closure, we reached out to the Rancho Vistoso Community Association, to the Master HOA. We reached out to them repeatedly, and I think that many of the residents know a little bit of that backstory. It's been discussed a few times, and I don't think needs to be discussed again. We also reached out to the developers most active in the Vistoso community at that time that we felt were most impacted by the potential closure, talking to them about purchasing the golf course or subsidizing the operation. But unfortunately, those discussions did not bear any fruit for us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oelbaum. Mr. Doug Anderson is up next, and then we have somebody, Bartlett. That's all I have as the name. You are on deck. So Mr. Anderson, please go ahead.
Okay, this is to Linda Morales. Linda, can you hear me? Okay. So my question is, I'd like to know who the traffic planner is that's hired, that's going to be working on your behalf. And my understanding that at some point I've owned homes in the Vistoso community for over 15 years. And I happen to have a brother who's a golf pro, and he works at golf courses, and he's been seeing this happen all over the United States. So I've talked with him about this quite a bit. He's running a golf course in Northern California, and they just were right up against the same thing, and they had somebody come in and buy the course. So they were lucky enough to get somebody to buy the course. But my question is I'm not opposed to development, but my issues will be directed at traffic and noise specifically for my area. So what I want to do is just make sure the traffic and noise, because I am aware that the owner of this property will have to find a solution. That golf is not a solution for this right now. A lot of golf courses are being shut down, and portions of it are being developed. The other thing too is what's going on in Northern California is there's one course that's 27 holes, 18 are being developed as a residential, and then 9 holes are going to stay open as a golf course and sold to somebody to operate as a golf course. So I just would think it's important for your clients to keep all options open, even if it's a 9-hole course, remain open, and combination with the open space. That's a possibility. But my main concerns will be traffic and noise. And so how will I get the name of the people that are helping you with that?
Okay, Ms. Morales, yep.
Sure. So Southwest Traffic Engineering is the company that we've hired, and I will tell you they're just getting started right now. So it's going to be a little bit as they're working through this, and as we're working through plans, we'll keep feeding them the revised plans as we go forward. But Andrew Smigelski is the principal of that firm, and he's very, very knowledgeable. He does work across the state of Arizona. And we're looking forward to having him as part of the team to really address that in a lot more detail than I'm able to as a land planner. The noise issue absolutely is something that I feel like in our smaller group meetings that we should talk about. We can talk about walls, we can talk about buffers and the mitigation of that, and any specific concerns that people may have where they're abutting proposed development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morales. So Bartlett is up next, and then on deck is Tammy Medlin. So Bartlett, you are unmuted.
Hey, yes, my name is Nancy Bartlett. I had a dental surgery this morning, so I'm really, might be a little hard to understand, but.
We can hear you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Several of my questions have been addressed earlier, but on my checklist, there's one remaining item. Yesterday at daybreak, there were 2 men outside my gate on the golf course side, and they were tagging trees. One tree in particular was 10 feet from my property. I am on Mulligan Drive. It's supposed to be some sort of a buffer, and I'm just curious what's going on.
Oh, sure, I can answer that. Sure. Those 2 gentlemen are part of the planning center. They are landscape architects and landscape designers, and they are out doing the significant resource inventory, which is a part of the project, of the beginnings of the project for the town of Oro Valley's process. And that is to actually tag significant vegetation. And significant vegetation is typically things that we try to leave in place where we can. Some of it we would have to move or mitigate for, but just because there's a tag on a tree doesn't mean that it's a target to be removed or anything. It's simply right now at this stage, tagging those trees that are the larger specimens, the healthier ones, the ones that meet the criteria, and cactus too. But in this case, we're really mostly dealing with trees. So that's who you've been seeing out there. I know they've been getting out there pretty early, but I've given them strict instructions to socially distance as they're out there, and to make sure that they stay on Romsman's private property and not encroach into other people's land. So that is what we're doing. Thank you,
Ms. Morales. So Tammy Medlin is up, and then on deck is Michael Bilodeau. Ms. Medlin, you are unmute.
Yeah, hi. This is John Medlin. Tammy's right next to me. I'm her husband. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Anyway, I was born and raised here in Nogales. I grew up. I went to med school here. We used to live right by Pima Canyon for many years in a big house. And when our kids grew up, we sized down and we bought here from America, okay? And we chose this because it was promised to us it was going to be recreational for eternity. Over a 1.5 year process was involved. They told the same story to me. We bought a premium lot because it's going to be recreation golf forever. And all the residents along here were told the same story, which is not true. Therefore, we bought. Had we known this was the shenanigan, we wouldn't have bought here. Okay, it is what it is. Now, we're right on Meadowhawk, right where the 18th green is in the driving range. Fantastic view. Anything you put in there is going to diminish our quality of life. You people don't live here, right? The guy from Canada lives in Canada. Mr. Morales, where do you live? On the east side of town or something? I'm not sure. But anyway, it's going to really impact our life our quality of life, and everybody else. Okay. Now, I keep hearing this win-win stuff. It's really not, guys. Okay. Number two, the desert, the decay of the desert. 50 years ago, it was Sonoran Desert. Hopefully 50 years from now, it'll be the same. It's very easy to convert it back to desert, which is beautiful. Okay. All the residents around here are opposed to that. And I know, Mr. Spaeth, you don't want anger, but I'll tell you, everybody here is ticked off about this. Bottom line. Okay. Now, also, my understanding, Romson's a Canadian non-banking lender. They lend in the United States. My question is, why don't they lend in Canada? Number one. Number two, I also understand they wrote off $81 million last year in losses. To write something like this off as a pittance, maybe the other thing we could do is the Preserve Vistoso could come up with money to help buy it. I'd pitch in a lot. You get the rest from the state. Keep it as parks and recreation, some way, shape, or form. It'll block wildlife corridors, et cetera, et cetera. And the vast majority of people I've spoken to and I've seen respond to this are opposed to any development. Okay. And I'm also a trauma surgeon. I still go to the hospital. We have two outlets here, La Cañada and First, and I have to go down La Cañada. Put more houses in here, it's going to be a nightmare, period. No matter how you cut it, the traffic's going to be a nightmare. And I don't know how you can plan traffic now, and then in 5 years, it's going to be worse. Plus, for 3 years, we're going to have yellow construction equipment, noise, and dust all over the place. Bottom line, and I think the elected officials need to listen to it, most of the people do not, 99% do not want any development. Just keep it as is. We can come to a solution.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morales, did you have anything you wanted to answer?
I'm going to kick this one to Peter since he has the history longer than I do on this.
Okay, let me get to Peter. All right, Mr. Oelbaum, you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Just to address, I guess the easiest question to address, which is why don't we lend in Canada? Romspen does lend in Canada. Of our 40-year history, I believe the first 32 of those years was in Canada alone. And, we've been lending in the US for a number of years. And I think at this point it represents roughly half of our portfolio, but we do lend money in Canada as well as the US. To address the issue of losses, we already assume we are holding loss provision for this course. As you can imagine, and I've said this many times, at this point, we're into this for well in excess of $10 million. And, nothing that we're talking about today is going to return that kind of money to us. We are going to take a loss here. The question is what that number is. And, we will soldier on and we will continue to go, but we are fiduciaries of a fund that have investors that are people that may be not unlike yourself, and they invest in our company. And as a fiduciary of that fund, I cannot simply make choices to walk away from this or that without regard to those people's principal, those people's capital. And that's my obligation as a fiduciary of the fund. So I think I've answered the questions that were specifically asked of us. There was some discussion about why don't we just sell to preserve. I noted that Michael Bilodeau is next on the roster. But, we have been talking to preserve for some time. We are, our thought here was that we could hand over for no money a large portion of this property, as opposed to, trying to find the money for preserve to buy it from us. But that remains an open question. I think the best value, my personal opinion, is to achieve 150 acres without any purchase price, and have a substantial portion of this golf course remain an important public amenity. But that's that is my opinion and may not be shared by everyone. I can understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Oelbaum. So yes, Mr. Michael Bilodeau is up next, and then on deck is Walt. If your account name is Walt, you are up next. So Mr. Bilodeau, you are unmuted. Oh, looks like there you go.
There we go. Thank you. And just one comment before I go on. I've had a couple people text me that their hand has been up for quite a while. I don't know if there's a comment you can make afterwards, Michael, about what might be going on there. So my name is Michael Bilodeau. I'm the president of Preserve Vistoso. And I've been looking at this issue for over a year now. As Peter said, we had discussions back in April of last year. There's quite a history here, more than any of us, I think, knew about when the golf course closed. As was mentioned before, Romspen took over the property when a loan defaulted. And it looks like from 2015, they knew that potentially they would have to look at some way of recovering their money, and looking at rezoning was one of them. Peter has mentioned a couple times they attempted to reach out to stakeholders, but as we've learned from the last year, there's thousands of stakeholders that just weren't aware of what was happening. Bayervella mentioned that he thought it was premature to look at purchasing the property. I definitely look at it very differently than that. My understanding is when the pad was developed back in 1980, it was very intentional how they designed the entire area to include residential and recreational space. And at the time, golf was the thing that they were envisioning. And so that's what was put in there. The community sort of had an expectation. I almost think the town had an expectation that this would be the way that it was created. And it was a surprise to a number of folks when the golf course closed. The message that Peter shared with the folks he shared did not make it around until that event happened and people began to notice. My wife and I bought the property not knowing it had closed, or put out the offer on our property not knowing that. And there, even as of a couple months ago, there were town officials that didn't know the course was closed. And so from my perspective, looking at trying to purchase and maintain the property is the first step we should try to be looking at. Save Vistoso was a previous group that spent a lot of time, a lot of effort in looking for how to save the golf course. After the PLP deal fell through, that's when Preserve Vistoso formed. And so that was the beginning of last year. We've had to form an organization in order to take a look at some of these options. And so we needed to be a nonprofit, given the amount of money that Romspen is looking to make from the property. And we didn't get acceptance from the IRS for our status until the end of 2019. We started working on our fundraising efforts in January. And only a few weeks later is when we found out that there was that Romspen, Peter, had made his intent known that he was looking to file in March. And so, although I'm sure from Romspen's perspective, this feels like something that's been going on for a long time, this has not been communicated to the community. It is something that's very new, and we are working our butts off. We're all volunteers. We really appreciate everyone that's worked on this, but I think there are some very good scenarios that could happen out of this. Romspen isn't looking to build houses. That's just one option to try to recoup some of their losses. The thing that I think the community is really attracted to, and I wish the town was participating in a greater fashion for this, is let's look to save it as a nature preserve and community trail. There's a lot of interest. There are grants out there. There are groups that are willing to work with us. We need a little bit of cooperation from the town. And I'd also like to see, especially given that Spectra has backed out, would Romspen be willing to postpone their application so that we can explore some of these options some more and try to get something that would be good for everyone? Thank you.
Ms. Morales, did you have anything you'd like to answer?
Yeah, I can start. The answer to the last question, I think, is really the one, why don't we delay things? And Peter, please jump in if you want to add anything. The reason we can't continue to wait is that everyone's property values and everyone's ability to transfer, to sell, to do whatever they want to do with their homes is a little bit in jeopardy right now. It's a lot in jeopardy. There's uncertainty out there. No one knows what's going on. We've got an open space that Romspin's spending money still to maintain in a minimal way, because they end up keeping the safety up. And when I say minimal, it sounded more negative than it should have been, keeping it so it's safe and keeping so there's not fire hazards and everything else. But it's in limbo, and we need to clear this up for the sake of everyone, just to keep moving on. I would say it makes sense to continue to pursue those grant opportunities, because there's going to be an expense associated with developing this and making this into whatever the neighborhood wants. And I think I mentioned that before, that there should be a community planning effort to talk about what everyone in the community wants to see in that 115 acres, or whatever we end up deeding over to this third party. So those funds could potentially be used for that as well. I know you'd like to have the whole thing, but we really think that this would be a way to resolve things in a more easy or quicker manner to come to some resolution for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morales. So next up is Walt, and then somebody's going to have to help me. So the next person on deck, their Zoom name is iPad. So if you happen to notice that your name is iPad, you are on deck. And yes, to Mr. Bilodeau's point, we do have a number of folks who have their hands up and have had their hands up for a while. So please be patient. We're trying to be as efficient as possible to try and get to your question. So we have not forgotten, I promise. So Walt, if you're ready, you are unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Walter Rogers. I live in Stone Terrace, and I do live on the golf course. I do want to try, first thing here is to put some numbers to the proposed win-win solution. I've already heard from a couple of my neighbors who've received their assessor's tax statement. One property went down 6.5% in value and another 8% in value. In my own personal case, if I lost 8% in value on my home, I would be losing about $33,472 in value. So moving that forward to everybody involved in this situation, there's 510 residences that live directly on the golf course that have an total assessed value of $195,738,708. If those people lost an 8% reduction in their assessed value, the total losses would be $15,659,097 in losses. And that's just at 8%. If it doubled that, the loss would be as much as $30 million. Now, on the other side of the coin is we have a foreign developer, an investment firm, who stands to gain probably somewhere in the vicinity of $8 to $10 million by rezoning the property and selling it. So you have a net turnaround of something like 8 to 10 million for the developer, and you have a loss of 15 to $30 million for the people who live on the golf course. So I do want to point out that, in my opinion, that is definitely not a win-win solution. So I do have one other point that I would like to make, and that is that one of the most important things I believe in reference to the proposals is that if the developer were to dedicate a minimum of 130-foot buffer between any parcel that's proposed for the zoning and the adjacent existing residence, with 150-foot minimum buffer, that would be about a half a football field. That would go a significant way toward reducing the impact on any of the homes that would be impacted. It would also bring the total amount of land that could be rezoned somewhere down into the 40 or 50 acre range, which is something that I think hopefully would be acceptable to be able to move toward a real win-win solution. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Morales, did you have anything you'd like to add?
On the topic of the buffers, absolutely. We we plan to talk about this in a lot more detail when we get into the smaller group meetings. I think I said in the last video that I don't believe it's a one size fits all. We're trying to match up densities, and typically where you're closer to the same density or intensity of use, buffers may not have to be quite as large to still have a impact and a positive impact on the compatibility of the uses. I think Pat Lopez wanted to add some other comments.
Okay, yeah, I will unmute Mr. Lopez. Go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to respond directly to what Walt had said. I mean, Walt, I think you're right that part of the problem here is the uncertainty is decreasing land values, but I think there is a misconception in terms of what Romspen is trying to achieve financially. 2 years ago, when they brought this problem to the public, they offered to sell the property for $3.5 million. Neither of those offers, two people stepped up and said they were interested. Neither of those offers closed. Most recently, there has been an overture to purchase the property. And again, they've offered to sell at a significantly smaller price than what you've suggested. I think in the interest of respecting people's maybe confidentiality as they work on this, I won't say anything, but it's much less than Romspen's investment in the property and the additional costs. So this is not a situation where Romspen is looking to make a windfall. They are simply looking to reduce their losses, and they're looking to do it in a way that also should help reduce the losses to their neighbors. And they're open to this, as Linda said, you know, whether it's discussions about buffers or specific issues. We're not here telling you this is it. There's nothing more to discuss. We're here to say we do want to find that win-win solution that Mr. Spaeth has suggested. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lopez. So up next, again, if your Zoom name is iPad, hopefully you know who you are. You are up. I'm going to unmute you, and on deck is Bill Sugars. All right, whoever's name is iPad, I have unmuted you. Do you have a question?
Oh, Mike, I'm sorry about that. I didn't see that.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. My comments and questions are directed to Mr. Oelbaum. First, it's just, I find it interesting that the narrative has now changed from enhancing the fabric of Rancho Vistoso to go into a win-win, and now the carrot that's hanging out there is the exchange and dedication of 115 acres. If you would just comment on that, please. B, and I'll make this quick. I totally get as you being a fiduciary of your fund, but for you to recoup any of the losses for Romspen and your investors at the expense of any others, to me, is just unconscionable. And that's exactly what's happening here. If you'd comment on that, I'd appreciate it. And then the last item, question. Just if you would just explain to us, and I'm just going to reverse the scenario here, and I'll be respectful with this. I'd just like to know what your personal course of action would be if I was in Toronto and I owned property that I willingly and knowingly purchased that was immediately adjacent to yours, and that was your forever retirement home that you put everything into. And then I went to the Toronto Town Council. I asked them to do a general plan amendment to change the land designation. I went to them to do a PAD amendment to change the zoning, all to benefit me, but it was going to be at your detriment. So if you would comment on those three items, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Oelbaum, you are unmuted if you would like to respond.
Sure. So I'm not sure precisely what was meant by the changing narrative. We have our narrative has been the same here. I think that what we are trying to achieve here is a win-win solution, and it is a way to take what is a pretty awful situation of a closed golf course, and do something that would restore some confidence in this part of the real estate market, some certainty in this part of the real estate market, so that people understood what this land would be. Because until there's a determination of what this land will be, there will always be that open question, which I think impacts property values. So there hasn't been a changing narrative in that respect, in my opinion, but I may not have appreciated the question entirely. To address I guess the second question, development happens in every town, in every city, and in every country. And it's no different in Canada and in Toronto. When you live in a urban or suburban environment, land gets developed, and land uses change and they adapt, and clearly not everybody always agrees on exactly what the right use or what right form is for any particular property. But it's so at the same time, I don't expect a parcel of land that is not deed restricted in perpetuity to remain whatever it is in perpetuity. And so all levels of land planning happen in every community, and communities change over time, and something that was once farmland becomes subdivision. Something that was once densely populated single-family home sometimes becomes high-rise, and these things do happen. And while it may not be what you thought it was going to be at every point in time, these things happen every day, and we've had to deal with them in Toronto like anywhere else. On the question that was asked about as a fiduciary of the fund, the golf course closed, and that is what impacted the property values. When nobody questioned whether I was doing the right thing, when we were investing millions of dollars in the ongoing losses of the golf course, which was subsidizing homeowners in Vistoso and at the expense of our unit holders, to which I was a fiduciary. So, these things, we are where we are today. The golf course is closed. The golf course will not be opening. There's no way to make a profitable golf course in this day and age in Arizona, and certainly not one where you had to rehabilitate it and rebuild it essentially. And the question is, what will we do next, and what happens here? So I don't view this quite in the same way as has been expressed by yourself, but I'm trying to find a solution that we don't profit from, by the way, but which will stem some of our losses and hopefully restore some value to the housing in the area, which has suffered because the golf course closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oelbaum. Bill Sugars is up next, and then on deck is iPad 92. So, Mr. Sugars, please go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Good, good. I have one question and one comment. I had found a request by Herb Kai for general plan amendment on First and Tangerine for 13.4 acres for senior assisted living / condo / apartments. So my question to the town and to you, Linda, Ms. Morales, is where's the need for another senior assisted living facility when Splendido is expanding, The new one by the OV Hospital, Ord Valley Hospital, is opening. I heard that Nakoma Sky might be starting up their project again. And there are at least 3 sites in Innovation Park that would fit nicely for another assisted living. So what I don't understand is why you feel, and the town hasn't pushed back, an assisted living would fit nicely inside 3 residential areas, which that's what we all have here. And none of those other facilities are in a residential community. So for what reasoning could the town have for approving a high density residential, which I don't believe is what assisted living is? That's a commercial property, even though the zoning code says it isn't. So that's number one. That's a question which none of us can quite figure out why Jeff Farmer thought this site and the realtor broker thought this site would fly. And I don't understand how you could support it as a land planner. The second issue is a comment. It's for you, Peter. We haven't talked in a while, but I'm a little mystified by your stakeholder answer, because not once did you reach out in 2017 or 2018 to the golf club membership or the homeowners to explain the financial situation of the golf course. You tried to get meetings with the VCA and were rebuffed both in 2017 and 2018. And I believe it was after your meeting at Sun City when you and I spoke, and I mentioned to you that the VCA isn't your contact point. You should be meeting with the homeowners and the golf club members, yet you continue to work with the VCA, particularly Pat Straney and Lauren Lee, the GM for the VCA, and totally ignored us for trying to find a solution. Then the other thing is I requested a line item of capital expenditures that you put into the golf course, which went previously, you said 6 million, and then it was 10 million. And I'm trying to figure out, all of us who played the course, where that money went for capital expenditures. Operating losses are not capital expenditures. Operating losses occur through poor management, poor running of a facility, and OB Sports did nothing to promote the golf course. And so that's basically, I just wanted to clarify that point with you, Peter. So you can answer that or not. It doesn't matter to me. I just think we need to be upfront and honest of what you did and didn't do. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sugars. So I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Morales to address the first part, and then we can turn it over to Mr. Oelbaum to answer the second part if you'd like. So Ms. Morales.
So as far as the assisted living, I can tell you that we were approached by Spectra as well as others. And so I have been asked to include that as an option. I'm not a broker, I'm not an economist, but I do believe that it is a residential use. It's people living there. Yes, there are people that are taking care of them, but it is, and it is one of those uses that's kind of straddles the line between a service and a residence. But I do believe that it can be compatible, especially given that we've given the large buffers. And again, I know that there are other sites that are being pursued. This is a very attractive site because of the location. And I'm gonna kick it over to Peter.
Okay, Mr. Oelbaum, you are unmuted.
Thank you. And Bill, thank you for your question. I think that the merits of OB Sports and what they did or didn't do are beyond the scope of what we're discussing here. What I will tell you is everybody who looked at this property as a golf course couldn't make it work. We tried to sell it for years. Large operators, small operators, they all looked at it, and not one of them could make sense of operating a golf course in this location, in this environment, with water being what it is in cost. So you may think that the property suffered because of mismanagement, but from our opinion and from the accolades of Golf Advisor and from other things, between 2014, when we took that course over from where it was, and what the quality of that course was when we closed it, I don't think there's any doubt that we did what we could to operate the best golf course we could under the circumstances. I think that in terms of who we approached and why, we can look backwards. We did not go door to door to try to sell the golf course. We tried to sell the golf course through a golf broker. And when we were trying to approach the community and homeowners, we did what we thought was the most logical thing, which was we went to the HOA, the master HOA, which in our opinion, we thought represented all of the homeowners. And we can, as was the case in the public meeting at Sun City, we can sort of look back and say, well, did they handle it right? Were they the right people to go to? But they were the people we thought were the right people to go to. And I think it was a reasonable assumption at the time that they did represent the community that they were the association for. So while I regret that that didn't work, we also worked with the community more broadly. After the golf course closed, we watered the greens for, I think, about 8 months, maybe. We said we were only going to do it 3 or 4 months, but we were talking to different people to buy the golf course. So we did so for about 8 months to see if somebody would step forward and buy it. And the people that looked at it to do so couldn't make it work. One of them, the only way he could make it work was by developing a large part of the property and still running 18 holes of golf. And he couldn't make the deal to make that happen. Although we took his offer, he just couldn't close. And the other person who made an offer to operate the golf course said he didn't need to have any development. He didn't even get 3 days past his offer. So he couldn't even provide proof of funds or get to papering the agreement. So, you know, the reality is that golf courses across the country are suffering, and they're closing by the hundreds. Every year we lose another 100 golf courses. And this situation we find ourselves in today is one that's happening across the country. And there are no simple solutions. So what we try to do is to find a solution that does provide some certainty and that does meet needs of some of the people, or as many people as we can. And that's what this proposal, in our opinion, does. Certainly, it addresses, it reduces our loss. And actually, that's the last part of the question I'll address that you raised. The figure of over $10 million is not the capital expenditure that we put into the golf course. That's total expenses that were put into the golf course. That includes the original loan we made. That includes our operational losses, which were really a subsidy to the community, and it includes the capital expenditures we put into the golf course, which anyone who played the golf course would agree were made between 2014 and 2018. I mean, it was not Augusta National. I understand that. But if you remember what it was when we took over in 2014 and what it was in 2018, it was a drastic improvement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oelbaum. Up next, we have iPad 92, and then on deck we have Tracy Wagley. So iPad 92, you are up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. First, I'd like to say that I frankly think that Romspen's losses are wholly irrelevant. They entered into a business deal. It didn't work out for them. They weren't going to share the profits with Vistoso, who was profitable. I really only care about what the future brings. I don't care about how much they tried to sell it or whatever else they tried to do. Irrelevant. I looked at this proposal and I noted that there is roughly 5 times more HDR than there was before. Wildly different than the land's original intended purpose. Most of the densest development is concentrated into a relatively small area. I can't tell from the map exactly, but I see roughly, when I do the quick math, 60 acres of high density, high density, high density, medium high density, medium high density, all in an arc. And it unduly burdens the people who are positioned near this band of high development. Personally, I think it's backwards. if you really wanted to develop the property, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be able to do something to try to recoup some of your money, but I really don't want you to recoup it at my expense, because as far as I'm concerned, everyone's concerns about the uncertainty causing diminished property values is very touching. But I'm worried about what 200 or 300 more units of housing is going to do to my property value, and it's not going to enhance it. So let's not talk about the uncertainty. I'd rather have a bad uncertainty than the certainty of a terrible deal that's going to leave us without recreation and permanently diminish the property value. It seems to me that this proposal should be the reverse. It seems to me that what should be deeded over is the band of properties that are immediately south of Vistoso Highlands Drive, which is really the bulk of the highest density of what you're looking to put up. It seems to me that that should be the recreational area, and the other properties, if you want to sell land or build homes, should be dispersed through the rest. I personally don't see a terrible attraction for a hiking trail that crosses HDR properties, MHDR properties, not exactly pristine. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, it provides very little recreation. I think that there are other options that should be explored for recreation. I certainly don't think you should be able to go above light development in this area. And I think that would have a lot to do with mitigating traffic, noise, pollution. And with all due respect, Ms. Morales, I saw your video. I find it very hard to believe that putting a senior center into the middle of a residential neighborhood is going to result in no more sirens and flashing lights than they do in another neighborhood, simply because you got that assurance. It defies credulity. I just can't accept it. I mean, the representation, that is. What the board decides is what the board decides. But under the circumstances, frankly, I'm not impressed with the proposal. I think it was bad enough to get run over by the car the first time when the golf course closed. I'd prefer that you not back up over me again.
Okay, thank you. And before I turn it over to Ms. Morales to answer some of those questions, I would like to commend that speaker for not so much focusing on the past. I get that there's a lot of anxiety and concern about what got us here to this point, but we're really trying again to be productive in terms of moving forward. And so I would encourage everybody, if you can, to try and focus your questions on moving the needle forward one way or the other, whatever that means to you. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Morales. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And I do agree with you that there is a lot of HDR that is showing up on that exhibit. And the primary reason for that is in option one, is the assisted living. And that is because the only designation within the general and the PAD, general plan and the PAD, is that fits into as HDR. That is also why we have looked at the alternative of going into a single family on that driving range area. And that would allow us to take that back down to an MDR, which is very similar, or is really the same designation as a lot of the developments around there. So yes, it does look like a lot of HDR. It is a lot of HDR, but we're prepared during the process, if we do move forward with the assisted living option, to put restrictions on the zoning that would restrict it to a certain percentage of that area that could be developed, a footprint of that would allow some open space and some density caps. There's a lot of ways that we can restrict that so it wouldn't allow 20 per acre over the whole thing. And if we did that, that would take out all of that area of HDR as true HDR, true apartment density. And really then all we would be looking at is the smaller piece just to the south of the community center, the piece that is already hard zoned as HDR. That would only be about, I think, 6 acres or so south of that would really be requested for true HDR. And even that, we're looking at a less dense proposal than what would be allowed under the 20 per acre apartment type of density. So,
Okay,
so yeah.
thank you, Ms. Morales. Anything else? Nope, we'll move on.
No,
Okay.
yeah, we can.
Okay, let's see. Up next is Tracy Wagley, and then on deck, we actually have our first phone question. Your phone number is 303-721-9168. If you recognize that phone number, then you are on deck. So Miss, or I guess it'd be Sir Wagley, you are unmuted.
Yes, I have one question and then several comments. The question really goes to the traffic and traffic study. What is the plan? How long will the traffic study run? If you run it just through the summer, it's going to be inaccurate. With the COVID shutdowns, it's going to be inaccurate. It seems to me you need probably a 9-month, 12-month study to have any information that would give you appropriate feedback. I think traffic is going to be the major impact on this area. I think placing, and now I'll go to comments, and that is placing a senior center on this road off West Vistoso Highlands is totally inappropriate. If you look at the placement of other senior centers, you'll see they're all on much larger 2-lane or 4-lane roads. There's certainly available space within the town of Oro Valley on La Cañada to accommodate it. That would be much more appropriate. I think ingress, egress from all these developments onto West Vistoso Highlands Drive is going to be brutal. It's already challenging to turn out of the developments, and that's at low traffic volume. I think you're really going to destroy these neighborhoods with traffic. The other thing, in terms of comments, it seems to me that we have Ron's been spinning a story about, oh, we are going to lose money. It was a bad investment. Granted, it was a bad investment. I'm sorry to hear that, but it shouldn't be a concern of the town of Oro Valley. The other thing is, I'm disappointed to hear the town of Oro Valley talking about a win-win. And this sense that we need to get something done soon to settle everyone's insecurity over the future of this property is really inappropriate. I've heard one of the council people echo this. And I really think the town is in the driver's seat here. Without their consent, this property is very low value. And that's when it might be conveyed to a long-term holder keeping it as open space. If we change the zoning on it, we're going to destroy that opportunity. That's the end of my comments. Thank you. I'd really like to hear about the traffic though.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morales, did you want to address the traffic?
Mr. Wagley, you absolutely nailed it in that this is a hard time to do a traditional traffic study. I've actually got a couple other projects around the county that are having the same issue in that right now, if you do traffic counts, they're at historic lows. So that was one of the things that we've asked our traffic engineer and to work with the town to get creative on that. There is historical traffic data out there, especially because it's been studied all along with the other developments that have gone in, that we can look back on some of that historical data and make sure that we are not undercounting traffic. And a lot of what that traffic study is really looking at what we're generating for the future use. And that is based on manuals and studies and historical data. And that is really how we're going to deal with that incremental increase and how that's going to affect the traffic. So yeah, next meeting we can have, we can get our traffic engineer involved and he can answer that a lot more eloquently than I am, but absolutely it's something that we're looking at. And it is also, there's a phasing of the traffic reports that are due. There's a traffic report that's due at the zoning time, but then there's also traffic reports that are due later too, and they keep getting more fine-grained. Just as the planning process kind of starts out broad and starts getting more and more specific, the traffic reports will have to do that too. And so as each individual development would come forward, there'd be a more detailed traffic analysis where we have to show that we're not going to have a negative impact and not going to push traffic volumes and traffic intersections so they're not performing properly. And that's all ahead. And yeah, and we'll have more information as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morales. Next up is a phone number with the last 4 numbers of 9168. And then Jeff and Sharon Jarvis are on deck. So whoever's on the phone, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes, my questions are for Mr. Oelbaum. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, so I have 3 questions, basically. Question 1 is, how did I understand there were a number of offers for the golf course, and how did those offers relate to the appraised value of the golf course? And number 2 would be, what has Ronspin done since they closed the golf course without any notification? What have they done to maintain the property values, or actually the property itself? And thirdly, when will we see a final proposal?
Okay, I will turn on Mr. Oelbaum. You should be good to go.
Hi there. Thank you. So in terms of the offers that we received at the time when we had shut down the golf course, you know, appraisals obviously can come in wildly differently. There was one appraisal that that I think, I don't know if Preserve did it or the VCA did it, that was lower. We had appraisals that were higher. And properties trade on different values depending on what they're for. So if it's trading as a golf course, it might trade on revenues, it might trade on gross revenues, it might trade on NOI and things like that. I think it's probably safe to say that at the price they came in at, they were more than a typical golf operator might pay for a golf course that had losses of that amount. And the reason for that is because it wouldn't trade as a golf course because it had losses for that amount. So it was, I think, deemed at the time, it just didn't make sense as a golf course. So it was trading at some other value. And I think that, you know, that kind of remains the case, is that this is trading in to value this in its current situation would be a very difficult exercise, other than, you know, what is the value of so much acreage and what is the 6-acre parcel that has an HDR zoning worth, which is obviously a legitimate and more easy exercise to answer. You know, and in terms of what have we done to maintain property values? So, you know, periodically we get a call from the VCA, occasionally from the town of Oro Valley, and they ask us to do something, that something has been seen or that needs to be taken care of, if there's ordinances that we've got to deal with, and we go out and address them. Just, I believe just today, in fact, there had been a homeowner that had gone to the community association to complain about one of the outbuilding washrooms that had some pallets near them. They were concerned about rodents and things like that. And we had an exterminator out there. They went out. Our manager came out, property manager came out, cleaned out the area, took out the pallets. Exterminator came in to deal with what was perceived there may be a rodent problem. The exterminator didn't think so. So we are periodically doing things that require that we need to do. And ultimately, in my opinion, what we're doing today is something that is intended to improve property value. I mean, that's kind of part of what we're doing here. And so that's ultimately, I think, that's going to provide the ultimate solution, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oelbaum. Up next, we have Jeff and Sharon Jarvis, and then on deck is Greg Zerbrug. Sorry if I butchered that. Jeff and Sharon, you are unmuted if you're ready to go.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, all of you. Couple of things. Linda, earlier, once again, you waffled. You went back to say that the assisted living was going to be on the driving range. It's quite obviously it's on the driving range and the first fairway. Why the continual waffling as to where it's positioned at? For all, Michael, for you and Linda and Peter, you once again, I'm going to hit you on, you keep talking about a win-win. It is a win for Romson only. It is a tremendous loss for anybody who is affected by this behemoth thing you want to put in. And my third thing, I'm sorry, you keep on saying millions of dollars of losses, capital improvements. You've shown nothing. Show the books, because quite frankly, we live on the golf course. If you put millions of dollars in the golf course for capital improvements, nobody can see it.
Okay, thank you. And I will turn it over to Ms. Morales if she'd like to answer your questions.
My apologies. I didn't mean to leave off the fact that there are fairways there. I'll try to be more careful. It's not a waffling. It's just shortening it up to say that the assisted living is on the driving range area, because it is centered in there. But I'll be careful in the future to not say that.
And then I can turn it over to Mr. Oelbaum if he would like to address your second question or third question. And I'll just say again, Mr. Jarvis, from the town's perspective, we are trying to foster a conversation to find out what that win-win is. Again, I personally don't know what that is at this point, but we want to have that conversation to see if there is a win-win out there. So that's the approach the town is or the perspective of the town. So I will turn it over to Mr. Oelbaum and see if he can answer the last question, or if he doesn't care to, you can let me know too.
No, that's fine. I will. I'll address it. Although I believe we've addressed it a couple of times, and I do think we're trying to look forward. But the figure I've provided multiple times is made up of our original investment, our capital expenditures, and our operating losses. So again, I would just remind people to remember what the golf course was in 2014 when we took it over, and what it was in 2018 when we closed. They were completely different animals. And at the time when we were looking to sell the property, and we were working with groups and community and groups of people, and including some homeowners who hired a golf consultant to look at the operation. We did turn over some of the financials at that time to that group. We turned them over to the two other purchasers who were looking at the property. And I think that's sufficient to show what we had done. You know, beyond that, again, we continue to look forward. But we have nothing to hide in that respect. We lost the money we lost, and I will say, just because a speaker a few moments ago had said, you know, that they don't care, they don't sympathize with us for how much money we lost, and they're sick of hearing about it. We didn't raise it. I'm not looking for sympathy for it. It was a response to someone suggesting that we were profiteers and we were bound to make $8 to $10 million and doing all these things. And we're just addressing it in response to that question. I understand that you folks don't really care that Romspen lost a lot of money. I think I take that as a given. That's our responsibility, not yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oelbaum. Next up is Greg Zerbrug and then Alfred Stegman. Mr. Zerbrug, please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard several times now, people use Linda Morales and the Romson dude talk about this awful situation of an abandoned golf course. I couldn't think of anything more lovely myself. It's resorting to the Sonoran Desert. It's a thing of beauty. And I would urge everybody could get behind a vision to promote that. But before I get to that vision, I wanted to say what is truly an awful situation is looking at the plans I live in the Vistoso Golf casitas, and to see medium and high density housing being built right up against us, you know, so instead of a desert view, property values are going to be wiped out because you're going to be looking at somebody else's houses. People are going to be selling at tremendous losses. The real estate value is going to plummet. It's not only the Vistoso Golf casitas, it's the Fairfield development that you've shown in one plan. You've got houses right up against them. Those are like $1 million houses with $1 million views right now, and you're going to wipe them out. I can't think of anything more sickening than that. Also, West Vistoso Highland Drive is a wonderful little 2-lane road. Not the original, not where it comes off of Rancho Vistoso, but as it moves along, it's used by many people for walking. It's used by the coyotes early in the morning and late in the evening. If that is, if you do anything to try and widen that road, it's going to destroy those neighborhoods along there. But enough about an awful situation, which is being promoted. Think of this as a world-class nature preserve that draws upon the expertise of the State of Arizona Parks and Recreation, the Nature Conservancy, the Audubon Society, the University of Arizona Landscape Architecture program. These would be wonderful opportunities, and money. There are some deep pockets out there that could be tapped into with the right kind of effort that could offset some of Romson's losses. If you want a win-win, to me, that's the win-win situation we should be striving for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Morales, did you have anything?
I think the only question is who would own that space, and Romspen would like to get out of this property in a way that they could transfer to someone else.
Okay, thank you. Up next is Alfred Stegman and then Sarah Demana. So Alfred, please go ahead.
Yes, I want to circle back to my original question. In option 1 with the senior living facility, between the one shown on the map, the westernmost facility, and the continuation of the cart path, which is everything west, it's very open space. Will that remain open space, and will that never be developed with additional senior facility edifices going forward?
Okay, Ms. Morales.
Sure, absolutely. That was the intent if we went with the assisted living, and that as we solidify plans, as we are able to meet with the smaller groups and come up with specific dimensions and specific proposals, we can write those into the PAG amendment to ensure that that moves forward with the agreed to distances and widths of open space and restrictions on it.
Okay, up next is Sarah Demana, and then Thomas Moses is on deck. So Sarah, please go ahead.
Well, good evening. This is Mike Demana. I'm using my wife's computer, so that's why it's shown as Sarah.
Okay.
Are we on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not going to go back and cover things which have already been covered this evening. We're getting close to the 2-hour limit, so let me just limit my comments to a couple of things. I am somewhat surprised that Romson is not pulling back on their request for modification, given the fact that Spectrum has pulled out of any agreement to develop a senior living community center or a senior living center where it is proposed. Certainly option 2, in my opinion, is absolutely unacceptable in terms of the amount of development that would create in this area, what it would do to traffic, all the other things that people have talked about. So the only option that seems to me to be even close to viable for the city to take a serious look at for the town is something that would put in a community center in the driving range. But if Romson doesn't have a binding contract or commitment from someone to do that, and the city moves forward and approves the zoning change, Romson can take option 2, and there won't be a darn thing we can do about it. So that's my concern. As far as, gee, we need to do it now because your property values are going down the longer we wait. I spent $25,000 in 1998 to live on that golf course. I'm never going to get that money back. So for my property value to go down a little bit more until we can get a commitment from the owner of the property to either live with what they had when they bought it, which is a golf course, open space recreational area, or to give us a commitment that they will not do anything with regard to development that doesn't involve option 1 with some limited use as part of where they're going to develop, I just think is simply unacceptable. And as a owner in this area since 1998, I just don't believe that we should be put in this position again. Many people paid a lot of money to live on that golf course. I understand that's water under the bridge. I got it. But we can at least have the recreational open space that we then bargained for. Could we, if we could not have a golf course in Arizona that we thought we would be able to have. So those are my comments. I would just simply urge the commission, the planning commission, and certainly the town when we get there, not to approve this at all until we have better commitment from the owner in terms of what's going to be done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Up next, Mr. Thomas Moses, and then on deck is Nancy Moses. So Mr. Moses, please go ahead.
Okay, can you?
Oh, I can hear you, but it sounds like there's some reverberation with a second mic. So if you could mute the other one, that would be great.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Still got a little bit of an echo. Are there 2
Okay, can you hear me
mics?
now?
You gotta turn yours up.
Got to mute the second.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. I've got 2 questions primarily for Linda. One question, I'm not sure that we can reach a win-win solution here, but it seems to me like that if we can, the key is going to be through the width of the buffers. I mean, that's going to be the key for getting a solution. And I saw in your first presentation that you had identified 50-foot buffers in a number of different locations. First thing, there was 2 locations that I was surprised that did not include buffers, and that is along the Vistoso Golf casitas, and then also the Richmond at Vistoso subdivision. I was curious as to why they did not get buffers. The second question is, or the other comment with respect to buffers, I think I know you're going to be meeting with the various neighborhoods, and buffer widths are going to be one of the key things you're going to be discussing. But in those discussions, I think what's important to consider is the fact that in many ways you need to have a wide enough buffer to be able to accommodate a trail. Also, nobody's mentioned this before, but I think it's one of the nice things about living in this area is the wildlife, and also trying to maintain the Sonoran desert environment. And to maintain these minor wildlife corridors, I think you need to have a wide enough buffer to be able to accommodate a trail, a minor wildlife corridor, but also keep in mind that many people everybody on the golf course bought on the golf course primarily for the views, but also for privacy. Everybody on the golf course has an open railing fence. Nobody has a block wall. And so that the privacy is another concern. And so if you're looking at trying to have a development 50 feet away, you know, you can't put a trail in, you can't have a minor wildlife corridor. You lose privacy, and you lose the views that many people paid a fortune for. The other comment with respect to buffers in consideration is that along hole 1, there is an existing golf cart path, and there's also a wildlife corridor that you know, if you're not familiar with the area, you don't realize that there is a lot of wildlife that goes from the wash, which is west of the clubhouse, and goes over to the open space near the tee on golf hole 2, and then kind of branches out to those large open spaces 2 and 3, and then also turns south and goes towards those open spaces on golf hole 10 and 11. So I don't know if you want to comment on those or keep that in mind when you meet with the neighborhoods. The second question I have is with respect to the areas that are adjacent to the Vistoso Golf casitas. In the original proposal, those were rezoned as medium high density, which has a rack of 6 to 8. However, on the conceptual plan, they showed fourplexes, multifamily fourplexes, which is a high density, an HDR zoning, and not a MHDR, which is a single family zoning. Now, in the latest, well, last time I looked at the website, it appears that the proposal has changed in that it's now showing medium density residential adjacent to those golf casitas without a buffer. But there's no conceptual drawing. The conceptual drawings are still showing something different, or there's no conceptual drawing showing the latest thinking with respect to medium density residential. So my question is, what's the latest? And also as a suggestion, in that when these plans evolve, and it's an iterative process, that there's some dates on the plans that show up on the website so people know what the latest is, and that would be helpful for understanding that. So I'll turn it over to you, Linda.
Great. Those are really good observations, and thank you. In the interest of time, I'll try to move through these quickly with the promise that we're going to talk about these in a lot more detail as we go. But the 50-foot areas where we aren't showing those necessarily as depicted as that, the golf near the golf casitas, we are matching up densities, and we are kind of apples to apples on that. However, we do have some open space, and we do, when we zoom into those areas, there are some offsets. I don't depict it as the green line necessarily, but there is some. As far as the density in that area, we did some calculations, and as far as the overall density, we could actually do it in the MDR instead of having to go up to the MHDR. And again, in sensitivity to the fact that we're trying to come in with the least amount of proposed density that we have to, and the smallest designations that match up with the proposal, we were able to do that. We were underneath the density limits for the MDR because of the open space that is associated with that between the units. And then as far as the lack of the buffer that you pointed out on the Richmond border, from there, yes, we do abut those, and that's where we match up lot sizes. We match up to those, and everyone then buying in the Richmond subdivision should know that the golf course at that point has been closed. So it's kind of a different scenario than the people that bought their homes quite a while ago, where they didn't know that this would not be a golf course forever. As far as the wildlife and the wash, absolutely, that's something we're looking at. Again, why my guys are out there looking at the SRI and looking at how the open space connects to the other things. So absolutely, thank you for that, and I will make sure that my team is aware of there's some wildlife movement there.
Okay.
Did I cover everything, I think, or at least a cursory level for now?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Morales. So we are at 8 o'clock, and out of the interest of everybody's time, which is very valuable, I will offer up, if it's okay, that we can continue to go. We definitely won't go any later than 9 o'clock, but we do still have about 25 hands up that we need to try and get to. So we're going to keep rolling, and I'll try and speed us up a little bit where I can. So again, I encourage you, if you've heard your question be asked and answered, if you could do everybody else a favor and just quickly let us know that, I would certainly appreciate it to try and speed things up. So with that said, Nancy Moses is up next, and then we have Gordon and Anita Parkhill on deck. So Miss Moses, please go ahead. You're unmute.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple comments and then a question. first of all, I am opposed to this development. You know, when we bought a golf course lot, we invested in a lifestyle and we understood that it was designated as open space and protected, we thought, as environmentally sensitive open space. The other point maybe I want to make is I will say ditto to the gentleman who talked about the 150-foot buffers. I think to make this this development even palatable, I think having those kinds of buffers and only single story instead of having a nursing home or nursing facility, I think if you kind of rethought that and put in luxury lots with some acreage and that were single story, that wouldn't ruin everybody's view, that might be a little more palatable. But again, I'm opposed to this development and the way it's currently planned. Now, my question is, it's my understanding Arizona statute 43-13154 reduces the property tax of a golf course. However, if the golf course is converted to a different use, the owner will be assessed a penalty equal to the difference between the total amount of property taxes that would have been levied on the property for the preceding last 10 years. If the golf course is being rezoned, the penalty should apply. Who's going to be paying that property tax penalty, Romson or future developer? And per my husband's calculations, that's probably estimated to be $2 to $3 million in penalties. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morales, did you?
Pat Lopez will answer this one.
Pat, okay, yep. Give me just a second. I'll turn him on. All right, Mr. Lopez, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mike. Yes, we are well aware of the applicable Arizona statute. Romsman did not make that election, but the prior golf course owner did. And that is something that we have to deal with, and we will. In terms of who's going to bear it, that is something that we will determine in the future, whether that's borne by a purchaser or borne by Romsman. That's a matter of negotiation. In terms of the amount, again, that is yet to be determined because we're not converting the use at this point.
Okay, thank you. Up next, we have Gordon and Anita Parkhill, and then on deck, we have Melanie and Jim Pylan. So the Parkhills are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, we've lived on the golf course for 2.5 years, and what we've noticed over those years is that the wildlife that's currently on the golf course uses the entire golf course as a wildlife corridor. There's mule deer, bobcat, coyotes, and javelina, and they seem to rotate through the whole entire golf course. The Romson proposals, both of them, cut those corridors in 4 to 5 places. Absolutely cut the corridors. That would have significant impact on the wildlife, and we think that would really reduce the enjoyment that people that either live on the golf course or could walk the trail would have in observing that wildlife, because we believe the wildlife would disappear rapidly if this development was proceeded with. I'd just like to mention a couple of quotes, one from the National Wildlife Federation. Wildlife move both daily and seasonally to survive. However, the habitats animals rely on continue to be fragmented by housing, roads, fences, energy facilities, and other man-made barriers. As a result, animals are struggling more and more to reach food, water, shelter, and breeding sites. Yet the need for wildlife's ability to move may be greater than ever. The expanding U.S. population is bringing more people and development into conflict with wildlife and their historic habitats. That was the National Wildlife Federation. And I think we can all agree that that's probably a very true statement. Here's another quote from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Whether they run, swim, or fly, wild animals need to move to complete their life cycles. We call their routes wildlife corridors. These can span anywhere from a stretch of river to a whole continent. National wildlife refuges are vital to connecting and maintaining safe wildlife corridors for birds, fish, and mammals. The more crowded and developed our world becomes, the more critical these pathways become. We believe that this development proposal is a prime example of what should not be done to preserving the wildlife and its habitat. And that's all we have to say on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Morales, did you have anything you wanted to touch on?
Our site analysis will address the wildlife corridors.
Okay. Up next, we have Melanie and Jim Pyland, and then Joanne Green is on deck. So the Pylands, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address my neighbors. I'm going to make it really short. I'm concerned about the preservation of the wildlife that does pass through all of this open space. The traffic since the school went in has already impacted the quiet enjoyment that we had because everyone drives into our neighborhood to make a U-turn, and they drive across the street on desert fairways to make a U-turn because the traffic patterns were not studied and were not really they weren't logically set out. So that's one thing that no one seems to have addressed when they put the school in. And I'm very concerned that the same is going to happen to Vistoso Highlands, where people will be driving into the neighborhoods that you're planning to make U-turns because they've gone the wrong way. But the traffic to get out of our neighborhoods has been impacted. So that's number two, the traffic. The wildlife, I think the gentleman did a better job than I could ever. The last thing is quiet enjoyment of the green space. And we also bought this property to be on a golf course. And we knew there were struggles, but we were assured from different articles back in the day, 2014, 15, 16, that Rompson was working to keep the golf course open. So there was no reason to worry about it at that time. Well, here we are in 2020, and we're still talking about it. So that's very disappointing to the homeowners that I know. The last thing I'm going to make is, and it's most a statement, but I do have a question for Ms. Morales or Rompson and their group. You keep saying that the property values are diminishing because the golf course has disappeared. Yes, we've all been impacted by that. So we're sharing an economical impact, just like Rompson is. The homeowners of this neighborhood, of this area, have all been impacted by the fact that the golf course does not exist. And what you're asking us to do is to accept an additional 15% loss in our property values because you're going to put in more housing. So you're actually hurting us even more. And I can bring you statistics that will show that there is an impact of at least 8 to 15% upcharge or uptick in value when you live on a golf course. So taking that away is one thing, but then taking away the common area that helps to sustain the value of our homes, taking that away is just going to add to the burden that we're bearing now. Now I hear that we're going to get an assessment, which I had forgotten about. So thank you and kudos to the neighbor that brought that up. I forgot about the additional assessment that we probably will see some repercussion of in the future. So I'd like to know where anybody and everybody is getting statistics to tell us that our property values are going to increase by putting in those homes in this area. because I don't see it. I don't see how that would be possible. And I would then ask appraisers who appraise land in Tucson to actually come and fight for us and explain how that works. Because I'm getting that information from appraisers all over town that work for lenders. So with that, I'd like to know where Ms. Morales and Rompson got the statistics to tell us that they're going to increase our value by putting in more homes instead of leaving the common area as it is. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I'm actually gonna turn it over to Mr. Paul Kiesler first before I turn it over to Ms. Morales. Mr. Paul Kiesler is our town engineer, and he wanted to address your question about traffic. So Paul, you should be good to go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spaeth. Let me see if I can get the video going. Oh, never mind. Anyways, I did want to address the school traffic and the lack of a study for that school traffic. And this proposal, I do want to give assurance to everybody who's out there listening that the traffic for this particular project will be studied. Now, the school was created by a state entity. The town did not have control of whether that traffic was studied or not. It was a request by the town for it to be studied, and it wasn't. So the traffic patterns are what they are with the school today. The town will be addressing whatever additional traffic impacts are created by this development. And I do want to emphasize that this development would be responsible for whatever increases they cause. And there was one other traffic question that was raised earlier, and that is, how can we go ahead and study the traffic when there isn't any traffic out there? I think we can all agree that during these times of COVID that yes, traffic is greatly diminished. However, the applicant has hired the traffic engineer who's done most of the studies in that entire region. So that traffic engineer has a lot of historical data. On top of that, what we can do, or what, not we, the town, but what the consultant can do with their traffic engineer is they can actually do empirical calculations, and they can set up a model based upon what's called the Institute of Transportation Engineers traffic count methods, and they can create a living model that's based off of empirical data. And quite frankly, that is a more conservative approach than real life traffic counts. Real life traffic counts never come up to the actual Institute of Transportation Engineers national statistical data. So that's a very conservative way to do that. Traffic can be studied, and traffic will be studied. This is a requirement by the town to make sure that whatever impacts are created are mitigated to bring traffic back to the way you enjoy it today. That's really what I wanted to add. Thank you, Mr. Spaeth.
Thank you, Mr. Kiesler. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Morales.
And I'm going to turn it to Pat Lopez.
Okay. Let me get to Pat. All right, Mr. Lopez should be good to go.
Thank you, Mike. So I just want to correct, I guess, a misunderstanding. The property is not common area now. I could understand if it was common area and was open space owned by the adjacent homeowners, that would be a different thing. It's private property. And I do appreciate the fact that different appraisers can have different opinions in terms of value. But I think we have to agree upon, or they need to understand the underlying assumptions. Number one, because it's private property, it's uncertain as to what will happen to the property in the future. So this plan brings certainty. Number two, it converts the majority of the property to what I'm hearing everyone says they want, which is public shared open space. And Romspin is saying that they're willing to convey that in any way that the neighbors would like to see it conveyed. So I think that's when I hear people saying win-win and some people not seeing that, I guess I'd suggest to everyone that the win-win here is that both sides, both Romspin and the neighbors, achieve certainty. Romspin achieves some portion of the property that's developable that allows them to recoup some of their losses. The neighbors achieve conversion of a substantial portion of the property to permanent open space, something that I'm hearing they understood, they thought they had when they bought. So we're giving both parties something that I think they would like to have, and that's what is being proposed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Up next is Joanne Green, and on deck we have Stan Riggenbach. So Miss Green, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
This is Mr. Green.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
The name's Jim. I had a comment and then a question, both directed to the town staff there. The comment's real brief. In terms of doing a traffic study on Vistoso Highlands, I think the people that do that need to give careful consideration to the additional traffic that's coming from or will come from the Richmond American development. Their egress there is going to be very awkward at the intersection they're at. And I think it's very problematic anyway. And then putting additional traffic because of this development there will make a pretty difficult dynamic. Now I'll move on to my question. And I'm new to local planning. I've not experienced it. So my real question is, at what point in this process can we anticipate or expect that the applicants will have a well-defined, detailed proposal so that we can have meaningful discussions? These are proposals that are clearly subject to change, perhaps major change. But I think at some point, you know, in fairness to the interested parties and the public, there ought to be something that can really be discussed in detail. And I would include, or I would ask a question, will applicant need to make an election on their two plans for the land near the driving range, so that when we have those final discussions, everybody will be able to focus on one plan. And then second, applicant has raised the proposal for open space. But if I read this correctly, they're kind of saying they're going to convey the land and then somebody else is going to have to figure out what to do with it. But applicant has raised that issue. So I would just urge the town, I think they have the burden to come up with a credible, effective plan for the management of that open space. Thank you.
Okay, yes, no, thank you. And I can just quickly address a couple of the questions that you direct for the town, and I can then turn it over to Mr. Kiesler if he wants to weigh in on the traffic. So a lot of this was covered in detail in the two informational videos that we posted online. So hopefully, if you haven't seen those, please go do so. So the expectation throughout this whole process is that the concept plans that were shown on the screen that Ms. Morales went over is that proposal for this area. And so as we're working through this neighborhood meeting and we're getting feedback from residents, and then when we move forward into the focus area meetings and then subsequent neighborhood meetings down the road, yes, there is the expectation that that plan will change and morph to reflect the conversations that we're all having together. So I would encourage everyone to look at the concept plan that's out there today and view it as this is the plan. This is what we're working with, and we're building from this as we move forward. So, you know, doesn't need to be a holding off until there's a more defined plan. We're building off of what we have now, and we'll be revising this as we go forward. The applicant will be revising this, excuse me. So yes, that is absolutely the expectation, that it will continue to be more refined as we move through the neighborhood meeting process. That is how all of these development applications work, and we've never had a development application in Oro Valley, a rezoning, I should say, that wasn't shaped by the public participation effort and feedback that we received. So it will certainly be more firmed up before it goes to commission and council, but certainly take a look at what's been put forward by the applicant initially. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kiesler, and he can briefly address your traffic question. And then if there's anything that Ms. Morales would like to address, I'll turn it over to her. So Mr. Kiesler.
Thank you, Mr. Spaeth. Yes, we'll be studying all of the development that's out there and consider that all existing background traffic. So the Richmond American subdivision that's being constructed, although it's not generating traffic, we know how many houses are going to be in there. So that can certainly be calculated and added into it so that we know what the background looks like before we even apply what would be new by this development. Thank you, Mr. Spaeth.
Okay, yep, thank you, Mr. Kiesler. And no, we'll move on. So next up is Stan Riggenbach, and on deck, I apologize in advance, I'm gonna butcher this. Is it Piccinini? Sorry, Pete, yeah. So Mr. Riggenbach, you are up. Please go ahead.
Thanks. My questions are for the town. And I had noted earlier significant issues were raised about the safety of the children at Innovation Academy. And I'd like to talk about the access road across from Innovation Academy. That access road crosses a property that's not owned by the applicant. And so I'm wondering how the town can consider an application from a property owner to build on property that they don't own, that they haven't asked for or gained permission to build on, and that they're unlikely to get permission to build on. And how can the town change a land use designation to residential if an access road can't be built to allow future homeowners to reach their homes? And finally, what section of the Oro Valley zoning code allows the town to zone a property as residential when there's no road access to it? Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question. And I'm actually going to give that to Ms. Morales so that she can lay out what their plan moving forward for that piece of property is.
I'm going to kick this to Pat if he's there.
Okay. Pat, you should be good to go. Please, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you very much, Mike. So with regard to access, it is correct that we would need to have access to develop property. And so we're looking at all the access issues. I don't know what else to say, but you know, yes, you are correct. Access is needed.
Okay, and let's see. Up next, we've got Jay Piccinini. I hope that's even remotely close. And then on deck is Eileen Etrime. So, Ms. Piccinini, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and sorry
okay,
if I butchered your name.
Yeah, and a lot of my questions have been answered, so I appreciate it, but I'm gonna go quick on this. But from what I understand, Romson got a default, or they took over a defaulted property in 2004, tried to make a go of it in 2020. They want to recover some of their, what they say is their losses. So I don't understand in 2015, if they said they were going to develop the land, and that was their intention. In 2016, when the city had a plan of leaving it as open space, why did not Romson or the city council understand the plan to develop the land at that time? Why did they let 3 years go by before they challenged, or they didn't even know that Romson had this plan? So that's my first question. Second is that I've noticed that every time we talked about offers for the land, you didn't introduce the people from Romson and their positions that were speaking, except for the consultant. So I don't know if they're lawyers for the developer or not, but how is selling partial part of land more profitable than selling the whole property to someone? It can't. You're probably taking an unbelievable loss. I think that there's probably some tax implications that are going to be written off on that. So I don't understand, given all the numbers that we talked about. And let me go through a couple of things here, and I'm not going to go into numbers, but right now there's 3 other developments in the area for assisted living. None of them are at capacity. The one that we had going into this property has backed out. There's a downturn in the economy. You making everybody in the area upset with this. You have a tax bill that has to go back 10 years, and you're still incurring operating losses as you try to keep up on the property. How is that? How are you recovering that? Even if you mitigate, it seems like if you want to win-win, this is the time, as the property, your property is for any commercial development is going down because of the economy. Now's the time to make a win-win with the citizens of not developing the land. It doesn't seem like it's needed. Your investor backed out. So I don't understand the financials of what you're trying to, what minimum amount you're trying to get extra by selling a partial of the land to a developer when you can sell the whole piece of land in its entirety for a single use to people that want it in their community. So I don't know why Romson would want to do that. The second, and I think you've answered that, is, and I've never gotten a clear answer, is all the green spaces that are up aside for what is on the development plan, is that guaranteed in perpetuity to never be developed? If it's only the development that's on the plan, am I hearing that right? Or is that some funny thing that says, well, we don't plan to develop it and somebody else can develop it, but we don't have any plans to develop it at this time? Because I don't understand why we have to rezone all the property at one time just to develop certain parcels of it. It doesn't make any sense to me. And it seems like this whole thing is predicated on the rezoning, meaning you have to change the zone for the property that you have purchased in order to make your return on your investment. Do you think that's really the right thing to do at the expense of all the stakeholders that are living in the community? It doesn't seem that we're not asking you to change. We're not asking you to change. You're asking thousands of families to change what they knew they were investing in for what you legitimately say, just recovering some of your costs, which is not going to make you whole. And I know you have fiduciary possibility, but can't we? It seems like there's a deal to be made here, because it doesn't seem like there's a viable path forward for you, except for you have to get this land rezoned in order to recover some of your losses. So can you guys, I know I packed in a lot there, but can you kind of explain how is selling partial of the land going to offset donating the rest of the land?
Okay, yep, no, thank you for your question. And Ms. Morales indicated that Mr. Peter Oelbaum is going to get that question, so I'm going to unmute.
So who is Mr. Peter Oelbaum?
I will have him introduce himself. Mr. Oelbaum, you are good to go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's Peter Oelbaum here. I'm a managing partner of Romson Investment Corporation, and one of my responsibilities is as asset manager of this property. So very quickly, because again, don't want to go too far back into the past, but there was no plan to redevelop this whole property in 2016. You were referencing, we did take control of the property in 2014. We operated the golf course and continued to invest in the golf course and the operating losses of the golf course until 2018 when we closed. And at that time, we also engaged with many groups and throughout that period to sell the golf course. So we've tried to sell the golf course for some time, and we tried to sell it after it was a golf course. And we continue to this day to talk to interested parties who were interested in purchasing the property, whether they be developers interested in sort of standing in our shoes, or whether they be parties that want to purchase the property for some other purpose, such as a dedication. The idea here, quite simply, is rather than having someone purchase the entire property for the purpose of preservation, we can, for no purchase price, dedicate 115 acres to this green preserve, and so that is just another way to do that. I think I think I've answered the question. I don't know if there was another element to it, but I think I got all the parts of that question.
Okay, yep. And I'm going to keep us going, just trying to stay on track. We're getting close to 9 o'clock. So up next is Eileen Etrim, and then Richard's iPad is on deck. So Eileen, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. So I must be unusual because my property value doesn't seem to have dropped, so maybe I should have somebody reassess that to drop my taxes. I love that the golf course is closed. Sorry to my golfing friends, but it has turned into an amazing place back there. I take great offense to being called a trespasser when I've been told that in order to keep the area behind my yard clean and picked up and to keep the trees alive, that I need to take care of it myself, and I've been given that permission according to our HOA that you depended on to tell us that the golf course was closing, which did not. But on a better note, the only win-win that I see here is something that is really important, and it's a way that Romspen can really win. And I would hope that Mrs. Morales and Mr. Oelbaum will take that back to the Romspen folks. In the United States, you've already told us, Peter, that this is a drop in the bucket in terms of the prospectus. Romspen is about investing money, not about and building and lending out money to builders and making money for their clients. It's not about buying golf courses for recreation. So to say that the annual report was a lie is also illegal. To lie in your annual report is not such a good thing to do. If that is a lie, it's a big problem for Romspen because you can't do that. On the flip side, there is a win-win for Romspen. In the United States, when you do 50% of your business here, or you do that much of your business here, it is a tradition in our culture to give back to the communities that you make the money off of, to make a difference. And Romspen has the opportunity to really create a legacy for themselves here. I would suggest, and I am very sincere in this suggestion, that you look at cutting your losses, and you can do it immediately by donating that land, whether it be to preserve Vistoso or the city or someone, to turn that into the Romspen Preserve. You would probably have more investors just from the promotional marks you can get and the marketing you can get out of creating a preserve and working with the state of Arizona to create something that's truly an amazing legacy. If you chop that up with all that building, there will not be the wildlife. I have seen 1.5 foot long or 2.5 foot Gila monster on there. I've seen over 1 foot long scorpion, a little scary, but I have seen that. There's amazing wildlife. There's stuff that doesn't exist elsewhere here. And it is a chance that they can actually give something back for all the money they're making off of the United States and create an amazing legacy and make back trifold that in the marketing dollars, because people will get to know them, and you might have a lot more investors that really see that it's worth investing in Romspen. But to say that you donated, that you bought this land or you lent money to somebody or you inherited something for golf courses because that's the business that you're in is just not sincere. So I would ask you to take that back and turn this mess into something that can really be something for the Romspen folks to make a legacy for themselves and withdraw this petition, because there is no other win-win in this. And we will fight you to the end. I'm game to stay here. I'm here till I die. And I'm game to fight it till I die, because it's not acceptable in any way to chop that up with building. And every person who owns a property on this land who paid, whether they paid extra money or not, deserves to have that preserved. We all bought it being told and understanding that it was recreation, and it needs to stay recreation. So take that back, please. I'd like to have an answer from them as to how they feel about that. They can turn this into a win-win, But building on there is just destructive. It's not a win-win for anybody. And they'll be known for the people who destroy that trail that wildlife goes through. Thank you. I don't need an answer. You got to talk to them first.
Okay, thank you. Up next is Richard's iPad. So.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and then up next is sorry, one sec. Up next is a phone number with the last four of 6608. So please be prepared. Richard, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Richard Molnar. I just wanted to say a few things and then ask a question. I don't want to talk about collaboration with Romspen. I don't want to talk about a win-win. I really need to insist that the town council uphold the general plan and say no to any development of the golf course property. The property needs to remain as a recreational open space, as a park for all of the citizens of Oro Valley. The town is the only entity that can apply for grants and bring in stakeholders. And the town has to explore the options as such as grants, et cetera, to acquire the property that has the miles of paved walking paths, et cetera. You know there are ways to get this done. I hear this talk about property value certainty. The town can make this issue go away. They need to get involved. Over 1,000 of your constituents to the town council, they voiced their opinions, and the overwhelming majority agree, no development. So you need to do the right thing. I just have to add that Rancho Vistoso is part of Oro Valley. We're not asking for millions of dollars in tax revenue that the other citizens on the Elcon golf courses are getting. We want you to give us the same consideration as you're giving them. And regarding the last video, Parks and Rec is not at the top of the org chart. Citizens of Oro Valley are. I have a question. If Spectra Properties pulled out and there's really no actual development proposal to consider, so the town, our representatives, are not likely to approve your general plan amendment. So are you willing to approach the town of Oro Valley to purchase the golf course?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morales.
Many, many times, and often is the case, we don't have actual users in tow at the time that we're looking at doing a master plan, which is what this is. So it's not unusual, and we're not concerned that we don't have a developer at this time for a portion of it. We know that there's a market out there because we've been approached by others.
Okay, and I would also actually like to have Miss Christy Diaz-Trahan, the town's Parks and Rec Director, address the question about buying the park as a town facility. So Ms. Diaz-Trahan, you are good to go.
Thank you, Mr. Spade. Good evening, everyone. As many of you know, we're in the process of working on a community-wide master plan. And in the video that was shot a couple weeks ago, I made a statement that essentially said, understanding the fiscal impact of the COVID-19 is unknown. We have no idea what that's going to be. And being fiscally prudent to the entirety of the town of Oro Valley. And in my, as a staff recommendation to town council is that before we make any decisions, we need to have a thorough analysis and the intent of what it's going to cost to upgrade, to preserve, and to maintain. And considering that we have existing park system that is still undeveloped, at this point, it's premature for us to look at that investment, considering the fiscal uncertainty. So yes, while there are potential for grants, the Land and Water Conservation Fund maximum is $200,000. And that's not going to, that while it's a fair amount of money, it's not a lot of money. And so at the end of the day, it is a council decision, But we have to look at this holistically as a town and what's in the best interest of all town employees, all town residents as we move forward with investment in acquisition and investment in facilities that we already own. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Diaz-Trahan. Up next is a phone with the last 4 digits of 6608. And then on deck is Gail Lopez. I would like to point out we've got about 15 minutes left, so we're obviously not going to get to everybody's questions, but we'll do our best. So with that said, 6608, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, many of my neighbors have already said what I was going to say. I'll try to be quick. Mr. Oelbaum, I need you to do the right thing. This has been hell. This is not like you go to work and this is a financial loss and maybe you look bad in front of your peers. Maybe you don't because you did state that you're in for the long haul. Maybe it's part of the game. But please understand, this has been hell on us. Okay? You're talking about if the town approves what you want. The bottom line financially is you're talking about wealth redistribution. You're talking about taking millions of dollars out of the residents who are directly on the areas you want to rezone and a house or two behind them through comps because they will be pegged down below what the houses were that used to be view lots if you get your way and they're turned into interior lots. So you're asking the town to do a wealth redistribution out of the residents and into Romspen, and that's just wrong. And I need you to withdraw the proposal and do the right thing. Work with the town to sell off the whole thing, except for the 6 acres, which you'll make a few million off, I believe. That's the only win-win. Everything else loses for the residents. There's no other way around it. That's just the simple fact. And my question, I guess it's a request to Mr. Oelbaum, but my question to the town is to clarify that the differences between approving a general plan change, that if that goes through, basically opens up the floodgates. They can rezone and apply for rezoning and move it all around and change it. And this can just be a nightmare that goes on and on and on. So I would like the town to clarify the difference between changing the general plan and then how easy it is to then get zoning changes once you're allowed to change it. Thank you.
Thank you. And so from the town's perspective, I can address that question. So we are expecting that the general plan amendment and rezoning are going to go concurrently to both commission and council. So there isn't going to be this delay in terms of coming back for a rezoning down the road. So we will see that detail, and you, the neighbors and commission and council, will see all that detail at the same time. But in addition to that, something that the town uses quite frequently with general plan amendments is something called special area policies, which go with the general plan amendment and are attached to that approval should it be approved. And that puts some parameters on what the eventual rezoning, in this case it will be, item B on the same agenda, but any future rezoning for that property has to comply with those special area policies as well. So that's a tool to use to give a little bit more shape to that general plan amendment rather than, as you say, opening the floodgates. So there are definitely some avenues that we can discuss to address that concern. So with that, Gail Lopez is up, and then on deck is Mark Enzer. So with that, Ms. Lopez, please go ahead. Just make sure that you are unmuted on your, there you go. Please go ahead.
I have no further questions. They've been answered at this time. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Up next, so we've got Mark Enzer is up, and then Rod Watson. Mr. Enzer, please go ahead.
All right, quick note about golf. Yes, it is declining,
but there are still countless courses across the world that are healthy and profitable. I reviewed the course's financials, and the Vistoso's golf course's marketing budget was abysmal. Hence, it failed. Had a note been passed to the homeowners on the course, asking for memberships to keep the course alive, most would have gladly joined this to skip getting into the situation we found ourselves in. This doesn't matter, though. Or does it? Romspen is appealing to the town to change the zoning because of their investment loss. This was their doing, not ours. In fact, they knew they were sitting on a financial gain should the course close. They mentioned this in their annual report. There's no need to punish the homeowners at the gain of Romspen. The homeowners technically haven't realized their property loss, and we won't unless the town chooses to allow Romspen to rezone and build homes in our backyards and ruin the views that we paid for. So to that, I have 3 questions. The current proposals buffer zones are a joke, and they need to be reassessed. Homes in Summit North and the rest of the course in general bought on golf zoned open land, and this plan calls for homes immediately facing into them, directly into their backyard. This is unacceptable and likely why everyone in the community is so up in arms against this proposal. Are you willing to expand buffers significantly? Someone had mentioned, 150 feet or even further than that. The second question is the zoning proposed calls for up to 2-story homes, which is an absolute deal breaker. We certainly don't want to look into future neighbors' backyards, but we definitely don't want to lose our mountain views. What can be done to ensure single-story homes? My third question is, given the COVID-19 situation affecting our in-person meetings, limiting traffic, stopping the economy, and even ending your purchaser's pursuit, Spectra, who was pushing for this rezoning, shouldn't this process be halted until it's actually necessary? Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna hand that off to Ms. Morales.
Yes. So going backwards first, losing Spectra, that was not the impetus for this project. And I'm sorry if anybody thought it was. This was actually, they came in later and proposed the assisted living, but this has been something that we have been looking at for longer than that. So again, and I responded to the fact that it's often like the case where you don't have actual users as you're going through a zoning process, because most users want to see zone land before they get into deals. Buffers, yes. Single story, yes. Those are all things that I'm prepared to talk about. It's the end of a very long meeting, and we have those smaller group meetings where we want to talk about those, but it's a very, very often a concession that we make. Those 2 items are absolutely things that I expect to talk about as we move forward in the future.
All right. I think I lost the hand here. All right, so up next, I think is gonna have to be our last speaker. I apologize. I know there have been a lot of folks who have patiently been waiting. Out of respect for your time, we probably need to wrap up here. Again, please, I encourage you to come to those focus area meetings and have your questions answered. We certainly will do that. So the last speaker this evening, it looks like, is Jeanette's iPhone. So please go ahead.
I am unmuted. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Yep.
I had the honor in the middle 90s to be the Planning Commission chair for a town that many of you have heard of, and that Ron Howard actually made a documentary about. Paradise, California. I moved here for peace and quiet. I watched my city burn as I left, and I traveled homeless for 100 days until I looked out a picture window. There were quail, bobcats, scorpions, yes, snakes, yes, but beauty beyond belief. Beauty that was natural and calming. The fact that I was a planning commissioner so many years ago is somewhat irrelevant, because as you can tell, I'm emotional. And I'm emotional because this is my forever home. These are the ends of my days. I live in Gulf Casitas too. If I understood correctly, there'd only be a 50-foot space between my home, my forever home, my home of peace and tranquility, and a driveway or a 2-story building. I want to let you know that I am opposed to the variance. I understand there are many sides to this, but I do truly believe that the majority of the people in this area would like the town to consider looking at studies of how it could be continued as an open space, rather than only setting up this conference as you did, where one person is pictured the entire time. And as one person earlier pointed out, we don't even know who the players are necessarily. It is a beautiful place, and it's a place that is a corridor for wildlife. I saw a mountain lion. I reported it to Fish and Game. My neighbors saw the same mountain lion. We know that they go from one range of mountains, the Catalinas, to the other side. It's probably a 50, 70, 80-mile journey that they make, but they do come through this area. I've seen them. And talk about traffic just briefly. I bicycle every morning, about 4 miles. I go up to the end of West Vistoso Highlands Drive, and I go back again, then I go up again, and then I go back again, and I see countless people. They're not trespassers. They are people on that small, quiet road. Quiet, peacefulness, wildlife. When you continue your next Zoom meeting like this, I would like to see a little bit more participation from the people who actually have the perspective of preserving Vistoso. If there is not a violation of the rights of the applicant by having one of the leaders of Preserve Vistoso be also occasionally pictured on Zoom and also heard, that would be lovely. As a former town official, I understand that it's hard to set these things up, but as McLean said many, many years ago, the medium is the massage or the message, depending on which way you wanted to say the word. And what happens when you only picture the applicant and we watch her drink water and touch her hair, et cetera, and you're not picturing other people, we're not given the visual perception ability of being able to see the truthfulness in the heart of the person speaking. I have no questions for you. I am opposed for the variance, and I thank you for the honor of allowing me to be this last speaker.
All right, thank you very much. Again, I do apologize that we were not able to get to everybody tonight, but I would like to remind everyone that we do have additional opportunities coming up soon. The 4 focus area meetings and additional meetings if necessary. The 4 in-person neighborhood meetings in August and September, again, will happen in person if it is safe to do so. Otherwise, additional Zoom meetings will be conducted. We have the 2 Planning and Zoning Commission public hearings in October and November, and then finally the Town Council public hearing in December. All of those are opportunities for public participation. Again, the goal of this process has been and will continue to be to listen to everyone's questions and concerns. I ask everyone to participate in these upcoming meetings with the goal of working together to solve an ongoing community-wide issue. We can either work to find a solution now or in another year or 5 years, but the problem is not going to go away should these applications be unsuccessful. Next slide, please. Lastly, please continue to forward all questions and comments to ask@oralvalleyaz.gov and go to ovprojects.com to visit the project webpage. We will continue to add new information as it becomes available. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.